Roughly 1 in 3 people has some degree of astigmatism. Most don't know what it actually is. Beyond a word an eye doctor said once, it's not a disease, it's not damage, it's just a shape. To understand what that actually means, start with a normal eye is doing every time you look at something. Light enters through your cornea, the clear curved surface at the front of your eye, and gets bent or refracted so that it converges into a single precise point exactly on your retina at the back. Think of the cornea like a perfectly round ball, curved the exact same amount in every direction, top to bottom, side to side, diagonally. Because the curve is uniform, every ray of light entering it bends by the same predictable amount and lands in exactly the same spot. That single, sharp point of focus is what a clear image actually is, physically inside your eye. Now, picture a football instead of basketball. That's essentially what an astigmatic cornea looks like, more curved in one direction than the other, steeper from top to bottom, say, and flatter from side to side. It's not damaged, it's not diseased, it's just shaped differently, the same way some people have longer fingers or different jawline. But that small difference in shape changes everything about how light behaves when it enters the eye. Instead of one uniform curve bending all the light the same amount, the eye now has two different curves at roughly perpendicular angles to each other, each bending light by a different amount. Light hitting the steeper curve focuses at one point, light hitting the flatter curve focuses at a different point, either in front of or behind the first one. Instead of a single sharp point of focus landing precisely on the retina, you get two separate focal points, neither one of them lining up perfectly. Here's what that actually looks like from the inside, and it's worth sitting with for a second. In a normal eye, a single point of light, say a distant street lamp at night, focuses down to one small sharp dot on the retina. In an eye with astigmatism, that same point of light doesn't converge into a clean dot at all. It stretches, smears, sometimes doubles because the two mismatched curves are sending slightly different versions of the same light to slightly different places. That's why people with uncorrected astigmatism often describe letters looking stretched or a single light source appearing to have a faint tail or streak, or fine text simply refusing to snap into focus no matter how close they get or how hard they squint. Imagine reading a street sign where every letter has a faint ghost trailing off one side, or looking at a single porch light and seeing it smear into a small comet. That's not a metaphor, that's closer to the literal physical experience for millions of people every single day, often for years before anyone tells them there's a name and reason for it. Not everyone astigmatic looks or behaves the same way, and the differences come down to exactly where the irregular shape is located and how the mismatched curves are oriented. The most common form is corneal astigmatism, where the irregularity sits in the cornea itself, the clear outer surface of the eye. There's also lenticular astigmatism, where the cornea is perfectly fine, but the lens deeper inside the eye is the one shaped like a football instead of a basketball. Both produce the same basic smearing effect, just from a different structure inside the eye. There is also a distinction based on the angle of mismatch. In what's called with the rule astigmatism, the steepest curve runs roughly vertically top to bottom, which is actually the most common pattern in younger people. In against the rule astigmatism, that steepest curve has essentially rotated, running more horizontally instead side to side, a pattern that becomes noticeably more common as people age, likely due to gradual changes in the eyelid's tension on the cornea over decades. And in oblique astigmatism, the step curve isn't aligned with either the vertical or horizontal at all, but sits somewhere at a diagonal angle in between, which can sometimes make the visual distortion feel less predictable, since it doesn't align neatly with the horizontal and vertical lines that dominate a lot of what we actually look at, like door frames, text, and horizons. Here is something you can actually picture as testing yourself, because eye doctors use almost exactly this trick to diagnose it. It's called the astigmatic dial test, sometimes drawn to look like a sunburst or a clock face, with a dozen straight lines radiating outward from a single center point, spaced evenly like the hours on a clock. If you have a normal, evenly curved eye, every single one of those lines looks exactly as sharp and dark as every other one, because your eye focuses light coming from every angle equally well. But if you have astigmatism, something strange happens. Some of the lines look crisp and black, while others, usually the ones running in the direction of your eye's flatter curve, look faded, blurry, almost gray by comparison. The specific pair of lines that stays sharpest actually tells an eye doctor the exact angle of your astigmatism down to the degree just from which numbers on that imaginary clock face stayed in focus. It's a genuinely elegant piece of low-tech diagnosis, a single drawing of a sunburst, and your own eyes accidentally reveal the precise geometry of their own irregularity, just by which lines refuse to come into focus. This effect gets dramatically worse at night, and there is very specific reason for that. During the day, your pupil stays relatively small, which means light is only entering through the more central and often more uniform part of the cornea. At night, your pupil dilates, opening much wider to let in more available light, which means a larger portion of that irregularly curved cornea is now involved in bending incoming light. All of that extra irregular surface area means more mismatched focal points, more smearing, more distortion. This is why people with astigmatism often describe headlights and streetlights blooming into starbursts or halos at night, even when their vision seems perfectly manageable during the day. It's not that their eyes are working differently after dark, it's that the flaw in the shape has more surface area to work with once the pupil opens up. For someone driving home after dark, that's not a small inconvenience, that's very oncoming headlight turning into a small explosion of light every single night for years, sometimes without ever knowing why. It's worth being precise here about what astigmatism is not, because there is a lot of folk wisdom attached to it that doesn't hold up. It's not caused by reading in dim light, despite what generations of parents have warned. It's not a sign of disease or damage to the eye's tissue the way conditions like glaucoma or macular degeneration are. In most cases, it's simply a structural characteristic you're born with, often influenced by genetics, the same way eye color or bone structure is inherited. It can occur completely on its own, or alongside other common refractive errors like nearsightedness or farsightedness, meaning plenty of people are dealing with more than one shape-related focusing issue in the very same eye at the very same time. So how do you actually fix something that's fundamentally about shape rather than damage? The answer is almost elegant in its simplicity. You correct the shape mismatch optically from the outside rather than trying to change the eye itself. Standard glasses or eye lenses use a single uniform curve to bend light, which works perfectly for a normal evenly curved eye but doesn't address an eye with two different curves fighting each other. Astigmatism correction instead uses what's called a toric lens, a lens deliberately shaped with two different curves of its own, precisely calibrated, contract the eye's own mismatched curves, and oriented at the exact correct angle to match whether the astigmatism is with the rule, against the rule, or oblique. Positioned correctly, a toric lens essentially cancels out the irregularity, bending each together into a one clean sharp point on the retina. It's not fixing the eye, it's compensating for its shape with an opposite matching shape, engineered specifically for that individual eye's exact curvature and orientation. For more permanent correction, procedures like LASIK take a different approach entirely. Instead of adding a corrective lens in front of the eye, they use a laser to reshape the cornea itself, carefully removing microscopic amounts of tissue to smooth an irregular, football-like curve back into something closer to a uniform sphere. Once the shape itself is closer to symmetrical, light entering the eye starts converging into a single focal point on its own, without needing an external lens to compensate at all. What's genuinely interesting about all of this is how completely mechanical the whole condition turns out to be. There's no malfunction anywhere in this story, no tissue breaking down, no disease progressing, no biological system failing to do its job. It's photons of light meeting a curved surface, and that surface simply not being curved the same amount in every direction, or not being positioned at quite the right angle. Change the geometry, even slightly, and the light that would have landed as one crisp point instead lands as two blurred ones. Correct the geometry, whether with a precisely shaped lens or a reshaped cornea, and the light converges properly again. Roughly a third of the people around you are quietly managing exactly this. Not an illness, not damage, just slightly uneven curve, bending light in two directions instead of one, every single time they open their eyes.